We're so blessed to have her launch the book over here today. Enjoy the discussion.
Thank you. So this actually marks the first book launch of 2026 in Urban Solace, thanks to Perry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming here on Sunday morning. And it's quite fitting that we're starting the year with a book on endings. And endings are something that we all would have experienced. A relationship with a partner ending, or a friendship that's quietly dissolving, a family dynamic that is now beyond repair. And I think that it's so common nowadays, if I may say so myself, that we don't really pause and think about how is this altering us and to what extent is it altering us. And Suma's book, Goodbye, I Love You, does exactly that and explores what healing really means and why is it important. So with great pleasure, I'd like to invite Suma, the author of Goodbye, I Love You. She is a writer and editor. Her work spans across journalism, spirituality, and very deep personal inquiry. She has written 4 books. This is the 4th book. The first one is a beginner's guide to spirituality. The second is called Table for One, which is a manual for solo living for women in India, specifically for women in India. And the third one is a book on self-discovery, of her self-discovery through encounters during her solo travels. Welcome, Suma.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such a warm, hearty welcome. And thank you all for being here. It really, really means a lot to me. And it is ironic, but also beautiful in a way that we're starting the year talking about a goodbye. Because the main insight that comes out from the book when you reach the last page, is that endings are actually the start of something new. Only when you end something can you start something over, and it is the beginning of something beautiful, and the journey sort of continues. So,
Thank you for that. So, Goodbye, I Love You can be looked at as 3 phases. The first one, it begins in a place that all of us are very familiar with, or most of us would have at least heard of these concepts. What does assessing a relationship mean? What are tools that you can employ to assess a relationship? What are attachment styles? How does it dictate or how does it indicate behavior in a relationship? How do you know when it's time to let go? But then the book does something really interesting in the second phase. So Suma has deep dived into not magical realism, but into metaphysical reality, where she draws in lived experiences, Indian philosophy, and spirituality to really explore what does healing entail in a very grounded but very expansive way. And the last phase, like she said right now, is it takes you forward. How do you open your heart again? And how do you go back to life, not hardened by whatever experience you've had? So really looking forward to have this conversation on making meaning of endings and how do you learn to begin again. So let's start at the very beginning. What sparked this book, and when did you know that this is no longer just a personal experience for you but needs to be put out into the world?
So the idea for the book came about when I was waiting long enough in my own confusion about ambiguous relationships and the nature of modern relationships, where the speed of the relationship sort of dictates how quickly it fractures, but then there isn't enough support to take us through all the trauma, the physical, the mental, and the emotional aspects of the fallout of that break. So while there is a lot said on the outside about how we are meeting people very quickly, there are apps for that, and there's speed dating, and we form relationships very quickly. What happens when those relationships end? And come, please come. So when the relationship ends, where is the support? Where do we look to make meaning out of it, and what is the language we have for it? And I found that there isn't enough support. We go to say a traditional therapist, or we go to very specific places we go to friends who come with their own baggage and their own subjective ideas of things. But do we have enough support to take us through the change that we're seeing in society today in relationships? And I felt like, no, we don't. And my attempt at this book is actually purely from a journalistic point of view. I'm not putting myself out there and saying, hey, I found the answer to this one. Frankly, I haven't. But what I did try to do is take insights, and these are earned insights from people who've gone through various situations in their life, and stitch together answers to figure out maybe how we can walk this lane with a little less injury, a little less trauma to ourselves, or to how to heal from that bit. So this was the idea. I feel we don't speak enough about breakups, we don't speak enough about the reality of heartbreaks. There's a lot of grief, there's a lot of disappointment all around us, and it is a given, but we don't give it enough space in the scheme of things.
And so you have written a lot about spirituality and self-discovery. Welcome. Yeah. So as I was saying, you've written a lot about spirituality and self-discovery before. So how is this book different, and what was different for you when you wrote this book?
Yeah, I see this book as a continuation of my other three books. I don't see it sitting separately from the other reflective work that I've done, because all my books have a common running theme, which I didn't plan it that way, it just happened because I write from authenticity and a place of lived experience and earned insight. It comes from my travels, it comes from my lifestyle choices, it comes from my interactions and my relationships with people and what I've learned from them. So there is an exploration happening in this space, but there's also a journalistic eye to try to look at that same thing objectively without collapsing under the weight of the emotion that it carries, or that I would go into poetry if I did that. But I'm trying to keep a more objective sense of what's happening. So this book, in that sense, is a continuation of what's come before it, and all of it has to do with, hey, can you pause and can we look at this holistically? Can we also reach out to all the resources and tools available to us to make better sense of this?
Since you say it's a continuation, for someone who has not yet read your work, what is the order that you would want them to read before books?
Whatever order they please. It's not, each one is a separate aspect of exploration of your internal life. So the first one was about spirituality. Where do you even begin? People have a lot of questions around, what is it in the first place, and am I too rational, or do I have too much of a scientific mind to believe in something like spirituality? And the book addresses those very pertinent questions. Living alone, it is a social and political statement about the social conditioning, the weight of pressure on women who choose to make their own choices in life. Third book is about a woman going out into the world alone and claiming space, claiming public spaces. And this one is about rupture. When there's a break in something that you hoped for, how do you continue living, and how do you continue living well despite that break? So if you notice, they each have a separate space in life, but each dealing with a different category.
Alright. So before we actually get into this book, you've dedicated this book to Janice, the wise dog who you fell in love with. Can you tell us a little bit about Janice and how she made it into the dedication for this?
Yeah, so I wrote this book in the forest in Kur. I actually wrote the first two versions of it in 2024, through 2024, when I was managing a full-time job, I was freelancing, I was doing multiple things, and it just did not come together nicely. I read it and it didn't feel like it fit really well. So I packed up my things, I went to the forest, and I took up a cottage and I stayed there for 2 months. And the rhythm of the forest kind of held me when I wrote this book, and I had the space and the time and the right environment and energy to actually allow that voice to come through. Janice was the dog that she was on the farm. She was on this 25-acre coffee plantation. 4 years old, a German Shepherd, very big for her age, and every morning at 11, between 11 to 11:10, she would come running from the other end of the farm and she would jump on me. And we would have a little bit of a play time. That's for the outside world, but what actually happened in that predictability of every morning from 11 to 11:10 was also that I saw that Janice could see me. I saw her as a witness to what was happening in my life. I felt that she read my energy more than what human beings could. And that kind of connection with another human being or another being, a living thing, is rare to come by. Unfortunately, 2 months after I left the forest, she just passed away one night, tragically, from a heart attack. It was heartbreaking for me, and I'm tearing up even now when I think about it. But something about those 2 months with Janice transformed, I think, being witnessed, my idea of being witnessed, and I feel that's so important. And I hope that the writing in the book also changed during my relationship with her in those 2 months. And somewhere that idea of a witness, being there to see your journey, is important, and I hope that message also comes across.
I'm so sorry, and thank you for sharing that, yes. And also allowing us to start this in such a vulnerable space. Thank you. Now coming to the book itself, one of the most striking things in this is that you've drawn in Indian mythology. There are stories of Shakuntala, Nala Damayanti, Madhavi, to kind of drive home the point that the relationship patterns that we consider modern day relationship patterns, like ghosting or breadcrumbing, have actually existed for eons. Now, my question is, how did you go there? How did you think of integrating mythology into a book on healing from relationships? What sparked that?
Yeah. So my initial idea was to write about heartbreak. It was to write about rupture. It was to write about what happens when things don't go as planned with people. Right? And then when I started ideating for the book further, I started to think about where do we go to when we are in a moral dilemma. What is the standard for ethics that we rely on, and we say, hey, because this document says it, or these people say it, it must be true, or this is a good standard to hold up to, and this is a benchmark that we should all be living to. And that standard is for us mythology. Because mythology allows for this large gray area. It allows you to make mistakes. It allows you to have or contain every shade of emotion. There is right and wrong, but there's also the huge in between, and you have space to play in that in between. So I felt that with goodbye and grief and disappointment in relationships, it's necessary to speak about that in between space. And mythological stories, through powerful storytelling, give us space to explore every shade of emotion in the entire spectrum of human existence. So, like you rightly said, ghosting, we talk about it as though it's a new dating trend. It's not. Ghosting has always existed. Nala ghosted his wife Damayanti in the middle of the forest. He just upped and left. Breadcrumbing has always existed. Sita had a terrible marriage. We look up to Ram, we look up to all these characters, but do they operate in a very clear black and white? They don't. They operate in a large gray area where it's open to interpretation. So that's the reason I wanted to bring those stories in, to say that, hey, what you're feeling is not entirely new, because we've had this for centuries.
So when you were doing the search for this, was there any story that really stood out to you or surprised you?
I did go through lots and lots of stories, and I had to make certain strategic choices about which stories to include in the book and which ones to exclude. The ones I ended up including in the book had a lot to do with reader familiarity. Something that, characters who we've come across, we kind of know already. You may have already, of course, you've already read about Sita and her sons Love and Kush. Of course, you've already, read about Shakuntala and Dushyanta. It's so popular in pop culture, right? So to use those very familiar entry points to then talk about an insight which is which then connects it to relationship and breakup. So that was the point. That was the journey I wanted to take with it. In terms of stories that really stood out to me, there are many. There's one about the moon. I'm forgetting his name. Starts with D. But how the waxing and the waning of the moon came about. So,
Okay.
we've read the overall arching story about that. That's very common and familiar to all of us. But what goes behind it? What is the deeper story to that? So when I read stories like that, where it has deeper and deeper layers, I realized that the beauty of mythology is that it kind of carries you like a river, and you can keep, and you never feel bored with it.
So the story that stood out to me and was very surprising to me was about how Hanuman was a healer, and not just for Rama but also for Sita. I've read so many versions of Ramayana, but I've never thought of it that way, so I'm very excited for you all to actually read that and let us know how you all felt about that, because that was a very interesting angle to look at. We'll now talk about one of the chapters that your early readers have very well received. That is the one on rituals for release. Now, in our conversation earlier, you had mentioned that this was a chapter that was one of the most difficult things to put down, and you had contemplated for a very long time on whether this should even be included in the book or not. Can you tell us a little bit about what is the significance of doing rituals to release relationships, and what made it such a difficult decision to include it?
One of the things I realized while researching the book and in the process of writing it was that we have rituals for almost every life stage. Ritual for when you are born, rituals for naming you, rituals for birthdays, rituals for when you graduate, rituals for when you get married, rituals for when then you have a child, and the cycle of life sort of continues. But where are the rituals for when you break up? it's as though, that part of life doesn't exist, while that is actually the biggest reality of life. Everybody goes through some disappointment. Everybody is going through something, whether you call it a divorce or whether you call it a breakup or just a disappointment. If you have to continue being in the relationship, where are the rituals for that? And then I realized that the markers of happy occasions or socially approved occasions all have rituals which are institutionally approved, right? So you have a religion-based ritual for each of these things. But if I'm sitting in private and if I'm grieving over, say, a lost friendship, or if I'm sitting in private and I'm disappointed in someone, it still deserves a ritual. And it's for us to actually create those rituals for ourselves. We can't then rely on what's available on the outside because it may not suit us or it may not work for us. But then how do we create those rituals for ourselves? So simple things I realized, like in therapy it's very common for them to say, okay, write a letter that you never sent. Write a letter. So you get those emotions outside your system, it's on paper, so there is the physical act of writing it, and then you burn it. Or you offer it to the water, or you offer it to fire, or you offer it to nature, bury it under a tree, and let nature take care of it. For all of these rituals, you tend to have to come up with it on your own, and it's not supported enough by our community, and I feel that there is a huge gap there, which is why we need to talk about it more, and it's okay to talk about every shade of emotion, and whatever anyone is feeling is valid. There is space for that. So rituals validate that. It says it's okay, what you're feeling is fine, and let's honor what you're feeling with this ritual. It can be making a cup of tea in the morning and sitting with your notebook to journal. Every morning, as soon as I wake up, I go to the window, I open the window, I look up at the rising sun. It's a ritual, it's so simple, but it sets the tone for the day. So that's why rituals are so.
And what made it difficult to write about?
The opening story in that chapter is a highly personal story of something that came up to me during my own healing journey. When I did some shamanic healing work, I was drawn to sort of do some ancestral work. And I went out into the countryside and I did that work, and it is a very personal and private ritual. But it's been also now 7 years since that happened, and I felt that understanding rituals would be served better if I shared this personal story. But I didn't want to let that go because it is so private to me. But then after sending the final draft to my editor, I pulled that chapter back and I rewrote this story and I put it there and I said, I think it's ready to go out into the world. That's why it's so close to my heart, and early readers have pointed to that chapter, especially as have you, that it resonated, and I'm glad it did.
And now it's more of a personal question, so feel free to choose not to answer this without going into too many details of the ritual that you did. You ended it by placing a rose there, and what happened immediately after that was there was a herd of goats that came and ate the rose. How did you feel in that moment?
Yeah. At that moment, I was heartbroken because I felt that, hey, here I am offering this beautiful pink rose plant to Mother Earth, and immediately the goats come and they rip it apart, like hundreds of goats. They almost, like, there's a stampede there, And then they rip it apart, and I'm like, but my offering, it's in shreds. But only many years later, I understood that even that had to go out into the universe in its own way. And the goats did what they did, and it still has gone out of me. So my letting go is done. So what happens then beyond that is up to the universe. So that's also a form of letting go.
Thank you for talking about that. So many people would feel a bit awkward or skeptical about these rituals that are not really backed by science or logic. So what is something that you would tell them that rituals offer that just explanation or just understanding it does not?
I think to this I would simply say that rituals don't have to make sense to anyone else except yourself. They are not there to be scientifically proven to work. They are not there to be logical. They are not there to make sense to everyone. They are there for meaning making for yourself. So if I stand facing east and drink water at 12 o'clock every afternoon because it makes sense to me and it grounds me in the middle of the day, it's my ritual. Why should it make sense to you? Why should it have a scientific explanation? It doesn't.
I hope that answers for all the skeptics in the room. There are any. Yes. So in this chapter, you've mentioned that when someone else hurts us, healing becomes our responsibility.
Yeah.
And you've also called out that that's unfair, which it is. So how does one do this without turning it into self-blame? Because it's not very difficult for one to spiral into something, I was a certain way, which is why someone hurt me, and now I have to do the work to fix this so that it doesn't happen again. So how do we stay kind of centered and not self-blame or victimize and just go into another spiral?
Good question. So with modern relationships, we face this very often, right? It's a lot like someone is spilling all their unresolved emotions onto their closest relationships, and then it's left to the other person to absorb all of that, or to spill it right back, or to reject it, or to whatever, right? So wherever we go, I mean, it's too idealistic to expect that we'll only meet other healed people or other evolved people who will not spill their unresolved issues onto us. No. So despite what happens with whoever we meet, we then end up having to use whatever issues they have that trigger us to then evolve, to use that as our gateway into growing further. Right? How do we do this then, without self-blame? Here I feel, with a lot of people that I interviewed for this work, and also through my own experiences of waiting long enough in discomfort, is that self-blame, I think, is the easiest path to take. It's very easy to say, oh, how naive of me, and how stupid was I? The whole world saw what an idiot he is, and I didn't. Like, I am so stupid, I'm so foolish. It's the easiest way to do that. But how about if we just pause a little, step back, and just change that narrative by expanding our understanding of it into taking accountability for our role in what happened in that relationship, versus saying, oh, that it's a binary, it's my fault or his fault. It never is. If he's taken advantage of me that long, it's because I allowed it. So then what part of me then needs to come to the surface, and what part of me then needs to maybe course correct? So I feel from self-blame, if we can kind of shift focus to taking accountability, that is kinder to the self, and it's not really about self-blame. It is about seeing the larger picture. And here I'd like to say that with the relationships, I think the toughest thing that all of us face is that it's easy to talk in binaries, right? That good and bad. It's either this or that. But then the truth is always somewhere in the middle. It is the ability also then to hold two seemingly opposing truths in one container and know that both are true and not kind of collapse under that. That is, I think, then the goal of what we should move towards.
Thank you. So now someone's on board with doing a ritual to release a relationship. You've mentioned that intention is more important than the form of the ritual. So how would one truly know that they are ready to do this ritual without thinking that they should just do it because it's part of the process of healing?
Absolutely right. Intention works better than just simply going through the motions of a relationship breakup. But at the same time, I think greater understanding of the various parts of yourself that are at play when a relationship is evolving, either evolving in a good way or going through some kind of a rupture or a breakup, is essential. So what are these different parts? It's the physical part. You've got your dopamine, cortisol, you've got oxytocin, you've got all these various chemicals playing their part in your body. So there are very visible physical reactions when you go through a breakup. And there's the mental part, the constant churning, the overthinking, self-blame. What did I do? What did they do? And how dare they? And why did this happen to me? Then there's the emotions, right? Emotions usually are irrational at the time because you tend to then look at the sort of self-pity, go into the self-pity space of my emotions are bigger than what I think or who I am or how I feel. So it then leads us to do very stupid things. It leads us to then take revenge, or it takes us down very illogical pathways. So there are all these various highly complex systems within the human system at play when a relationship is involved. So then what is the role of a ritual, right? If you're just saying, okay, intention is enough and it will do the job. Intention is enough because the body, the mind and the emotions and even your subtle body, which is the energy body, they don't all operate at the same level. They're all not running the race at the same time, at the same speed. Sometimes the body is lagging behind, the mind has rationalized, but the emotions are also, they haven't caught up. Sometimes your emotions are okay, but your mind hasn't made sense of it and your body is somewhere okay. So they're all operating at different levels and frequencies. So the role of a ritual here is to cross the threshold simply. Okay? So sometimes with a ritual, the body has done its job just by going through the motions. The mind catches up sometimes weeks, months, sometimes even years later. And then the other parts of you catch up. So just coming back to the rose plant ritual that I did, right? Even there was an incongruence because not all parts of me were completely ready for the ritual. I was doing it physically, emotion was there, and the physical aspect was there. But the mind was looping. It still said, how dare the goats come and eat my rose plant? This was my offering to the universe, and the goats ate it up. Only later the mind caught up. So when these different aspects of your system are at play, it does impact how quickly or slowly healing happens, but intention is important.
So that sounds like if just the mind is there, that's good enough to actually do the ritual, and the others can just catch up.
From what I've seen, and also from what I've seen with like people doing rituals, sometimes the mind may not have got it. Sometimes you're doing it because maybe it's institutional. Someone is saying get married, so you're sitting there and getting married, but the actual realization that hey, I got married comes like much later. So that's the mind catching up to the ritual of getting married.
So there is no correct time to do the ritual. It's just whenever, whatever happens.
At least one or ideally two parts of you should be ready for it, and you should be ready to cross the threshold. And then it comes to you. Divine timing.
Yeah, which is another chapter of the book. My personal favorite chapter is Vairagya, detaching with grace. I learned that word while reading this book. So the chapter hooked me from the very start because she starts it by talking about life of Pi. So you have connected detachment with what happens towards the end of the movie or the book, where Pai Patel and Richard Parker, the tiger, finally reach a shore, and Richard Parker just walks away without so much as a glance back at Pai and just disappears into the forest. And if you've seen the movie, this is a very, very hard-hitting scene because Irfan Khan talks about, I was just there sobbing and in the sand, thinking about how he could do this to me after everything that we've gone through. And it's a very hard-hitting scene because you feel what he's feeling. They've had such a long and intense journey together, and Richard Parker just left with no closure. And the story really works because it's very beautifully woven into how leaving is not a verdict on what was shared. It's simply just life moving on. Richard Parker is a tiger. He was on a boat. He came to the shore, he saw the forest, he walked to the forest. It was as simple as that. He didn't think, I'm not going to give Pai Patel closure. I'm doing this intentionally. I hate him. I'm leaving. He just did what a tiger would do. He just went on to the next thing. And that was such a beautiful way to look at detachment without closure through the lens of a Bengal tiger. And if you don't mind, could you just read a passage from that chapter that really stayed with me? I'd love if all of you could hear it.
Okay. Vairagya invites us to trust that what we need will stay and what is meant to leave will leave, whether we're ready or not. It asks us to meet these moments not with resistance but with grace. So ask yourself, when your own Richard Parker moments come, when someone leaves without explanation, when life changes course without warning, will you run after them, begging for closure that may never come? Or will you take a breath, feel the earth beneath your feet, and step forward, carrying the lessons but leaving the weight behind? Vairagya is not about forgetting. It's about remembering without pain, loving without needing, living without grasping. Like Pai on the shore, you may weep, but in the attitude of Vairagya, when the tears dry, you will rise. And like Richard Parker, you too will walk forward into the unknown, free.
We now come to the final segment of this launch. How do you envision your readers to read this book? Do they have to do so linearly? Does the flow of the chapters matter? Or can someone just pick a chapter intuitively based on what they think they should be reading right now?
So the way I've organized the chapters, it is quite in flow because the chapters do get progressively difficult in content as we move forward. So at least the first 4 chapters, I feel it would be nice to be read one after the other because it sets the foundation for relationship breakups. And somewhere you'll feel that, hey, but I know this stuff. We've all gone through it, which is precisely the reason I chose to put it in the book because it's relatable, it's familiar, and we've all done that, we've all been there. From chapter 5 onwards, there is a progressively deeper layer to each chapter where I draw from personal experience and from the experiences of the people I interviewed for the book and from other knowledge sources to explain the metaphysical angles and to answer the most often asked questions which don't have easy answers. So I tackle questions like twin flame connections. A lot of people talk about it and there's a lot of misconception about it, primarily because of likes,
Instagram.
yeah, Instagram, they want the likes and the engagement. I talk about the difference between karmic relationships, soulmates, and twin flames. They're all different. They're all they put us through a lot of torture. But there is a high romanticization of these ideas in popular culture, as though meeting your karmic soulmate is the best thing that can happen to you. It is not. It is torture. So I've addressed these questions from a very hopefully an authentic space because these are all earned insights. These are from deep research. So reading the book in chronology from chapter 5 is not necessary. You can get to whichever chapter feels right for you or calls out to you. But I must say that it does get progressively heavier. The writing is easy because I don't know how to write otherwise, but the content is deep.
And for someone who's in the middle of a heartbreak right now, what is the one thing that you want them to trust?
Oh, you'll be okay. More than okay, in fact, maybe better.
We can now open the floor for audience questions.
So I believe that this heartbreak that you're talking about happened 7 years before. I think you mentioned that, or I'm not sure.
No, not the heartbreak. 7 years before, I spoke about the ancestral ritual that I did.
But what I'm trying to say is that assuming that you were already, like your journey of life, you already healed from it, and then when you were writing the book, was it difficult?
It was
Because you're triggering the things which you've already moved past. How difficult it was for you?
Yeah, great question. So, no, I don't think I healed at all. And definitely, I'm not writing this from a place of any authority or I know how things work. I don't. That's why I'm writing it. Because for me, the writing was also the exploration. It was the discovery that, hey, we have all these resources, and it would be useful for all of us to know that there are so many resources available and there are so many explanations to better understand what's happening around us. Otherwise, we're all just like kind of headless chickens running about. So this was a process of meaning making for myself and also for my readers. Was it difficult? Yes, it was, which is why it went through so many drafts. I'm pretty brutal with myself because I'm an editor first before a writer. So that editor instinct kicks in and I see something I don't like, I just delete the whole thing and I rewrite the whole thing. So by the time I went to the forest, I was on my 3rd rewrite, and then in the forest I did another 3. because I wasn't happy with the placement of the mythological stories. And I was just telling her the other day, the initial drafts had 60% of a mythological story in each chapter, and then in this final draft it's less than 40%. Because I felt that the insight was more important than the storytelling itself. So all those processes, the back and forth, it's torture. It's just torture. But yes, it's also cathartic because I'm learning as I'm going through this. I have not healed. Yeah, Bruno.
Yeah. First of all, a big congrats because
Thank you.
it seems like your last book was launched like yesterday.
Yeah.
I know.
And so quickly you have gone the next one. And that's very encouraging for lazy writers like yours truly. So congratulations. And this must have been really difficult because you're dealing with so many raw emotions, dealing with catharsis. What kept you going?
I think my journalistic instinct to hit a deadline, as simple or as complicated as that sounds, it just is that. And I am a finisher. When I begin something and when I start a project, I like to take it to its culmination. Yeah. So I think somewhere my stubbornness worked in my favor. In other areas of my life, that same stubbornness has done things I don't want to talk about. But with my books, I go with that energy. So which is why I want to, ride the wave till it lasts. Because I don't know, like it does feel like I'm releasing books back to back, and I have. Like this is the 4th book in year 4. But then these are all stories from 2 decades, collected from 2 decades. They're in my journals. I have a big gunny bag full of journals, and I keep pulling them out. It's a mess. I'm a mess, but it's that same. For 20 years, I've had this training of sending the front page to the press, and only then you can go home. So that 2 a.m. deadline it's drilled into my head like you can't undo it. Even though it's been a decade since I've worked in a mainstream media organization, but I think that's what it is.
One more question, if you have the time. Or
Yeah.
would you
Go
like
ahead.
somebody else like See, sometimes coming to I haven't read the book. This is purely out of my curiosity. Sometimes a breakup is not full stop. I've seen relationships that actually got better when both parties realized that romance is not really the best way for them to connect. So does your book also deal with having a better relationship? Because then I'm going to wait.
Yeah. But that's what it is, no, Pramod? There are enough and more books that tell us how to start a relationship, where you should go dating, which apps to use, how to build a relationship, how to maintain it, how to grow it.
Yes.
But there's not enough said about, okay, when it breaks and when you're sitting all alone with your own grief, what should you do with that? So the first 3 chapters, in fact, do address exactly what you're talking about, because it is at that crucial crossroads where you don't know whether you want to continue here or whether you should call it a day and move on. And some of us spend decades in that in-between space, not knowing whether you should wait on that promise of potential here, will things get better, or should we take a bet on something else. And that's, it's terrifying.
Thanks.
Remember, you said that when words find shape on paper, the release comes through.
Yeah.
They're just a mess in your empathy emotions. Then, and I'm just on page 26, you're speaking about ancestral healing.
Yeah.
So, in regard to that, respect to that, can we inherit memories?
Can we inherit memories?
Memories of our ancestors? For
That's a very controversial question, and I think on a public stage, I don't want to put my personal idea out there. But a short answer to that is that there is a possibility, and it goes into a very firmly energetic, metaphysical space, which is about belief or not. Belief, or if you believe it is, if you don't, it's not. And that's a very grey area to work with. But yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm glad I'm here because since morning I was like, should I not go? It's Sunday morning.
Of course you
lazy.
should go.
Yeah, and I'm glad
That's
I'm
the
here.
question.
Okay, yes. So my question actually comes from what you just answered, I think Pramod, sorry about that. Pramod, that there's that in between potential of a possibility in the future. But sometimes you know that there is no potential and
Yeah.
the relationship
Yeah.
is over, but the goodbye hasn't happened.
Yeah.
It's I love you, but the goodbye hasn't happened yet, right? Is there something in the book about that?
Yeah, the first 3 chapters do address that also very, very firmly. About what happens if you wait too long in that indecision and in that space. There are relationships where you can't fully exit because of various other reasons. You stay, so you continue staying in them, but you can't, but you haven't made a clean break, right? So the first 3 chapters do address that. But largely, this is about clarity making for the self. And what is the give and take for you and for the other person. And it's not about meeting in the middle, it's about how comfortable are you with your decisions. Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Sort of.
kind of. Sort of. Sort of. Thank you so much for that.
Bye. Any more questions?
Then with that we come to the end of the book launch. Thank you so much for responding to everything with such honesty and care. And thank you all for being here again on a Sunday morning, listening so attentively and asking such amazing questions. Thank you for joining us today. Goodbye, I Love You does not rush us into answers. It offers companionship, which is probably the best a book can do. Thank you and have a great day and a great year ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of you.
Can you ask them
Oh, yeah.
to take a photo?
Yeah, we'll take a group picture before we split. So, what do you want everyone to do?
I think everybody is already sitting.
Yeah,
When they
yeah,
walk
we
in,
just-
Sorry, not there.
Signatures.
Yeah, and can we take a group picture and then we sit there for the sign? Stand. We'll all sit, right?
Yeah, I think sitting makes